Alright, so for today we are going to be creating some watercolor kind of blobs with contour lines around them. It kind of creates this cool like maze pattern. So we're going to start out with a pencil and we're going to be adding some of our circles. So we want to add at least 8 circles throughout our page. They can be different sizes. A stencil works really well for this. Otherwise, any kind of a yogurt cup or fruit cup, whatever you have will work. So I'm going to go ahead and trace this onto my paper. Some of my blobs might be on my, like fully onto my paper, and some of them kind of can go off to the side. So we're just going to go ahead and fill our paper with as many as we want to. Like I said, it has to be at least 8. So you can add more than 8, but no less than that. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 so far. Let's see, I'm going to add another one kind of going off to the side here. I'm going to add a smaller one over here. And that's exactly 8. So I don't want them to be too close together because there is going to be some bleeding. It's kind of hard to work with watercolor and keep it fully contained, but that's probably going to be okay. And then in some of these blank spots, I might end up adding some different smaller blobs. So we've got our 8 drawn. We're going to start using watercolor paint. Now, we have already talked about the color wheel. We've talked about primary, secondary, and tertiary colors. I've got a color wheel right here. So when we are working on our artwork today, we want to make sure that we are using analogous colors. So analogous colors are colors that are closest to one another on the color wheel. So at the top of my color wheel right here, I've got the color blue. If I go, I'm going to move this so it's out of the way. If I go to either side of blue, I've got blue-violet on one side, violet, I've got blue, blue-green, green. So any 3 colors that are in a row would be analogous. When I look at my watercolor set though, I don't have quite as many colors, but I still want to choose analogous colors. So purple, blue, and green will look nice together. Green, yellow, orange, whatever I want to do. So when we start with our watercolor paint, we're actually going to be using what's called the wet on wet technique. So we have to get our paper wet first. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to try to paint in with water this entire circle. If I go outside, that's okay. And then I'm going to choose my colors. So I'm going to start with blue. So anytime that we use watercolor paint, we do have to add water to it, because when it's just dry like this, this is just pigment. Pigment's a fancy word for color. If I add water to it, it becomes watercolor paint. So I've got my brush loaded with that paint, and watch what happens when I dot it. It's going to start to spread because the paper is already wet. I'm going to clean my brush, and I'm going to go ahead and wake up or get my next color ready. I'm going to do green. So I'm going to do the same thing. And where my blue already is, or if I get it close to it, it's going to start to blend. So I'm just going to fill that section with the green. And now lastly, for this section, I'm going to go with yellow. So I want to fill what's left of it with yellow. I can kind of help it mix a little bit just by kind of dragging my brush around. Otherwise, I can just dot it on there just like I was doing before. Okay? And if you have sections that you don't really like or you want more color there, just go ahead, get that other color, and dot that on there too. So that section looks pretty good. Then I would go to my next section. I'm going to just choose this one. I'm going to fill the whole thing with water. Okay, and this time I'm going to choose a different color scheme. So I'm going to go with red and purple and blue this time. So I'm going to fill that out. The more water that I add to my watercolor paint, the lighter the color is going to be. The less water that I use, the darker it's going to be. However, if your paint is super shiny and sticky, that means you didn't add enough water. It's kind of a fine balance with watercolor paint. So make sure that your paint isn't sticky. I kind of like this because my blue has a little bit less water to it, so that pigment, it's really bright and it looks good. I want to make sure I get it all the way to the edges here. Now I kind of think I need some more red, so I'm going to add some more red in there too. Okay, that looks pretty good. So that's a first technique we're going to use, wet on wet watercolor. The second technique we're going to use is we're going to be using water-based markers. So for this, I've got my markers. Any of these Crayola brand ones should work as long as it's not a permanent marker. And I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to add some different streaks or dots into my blob here. Okay, if I use the side of my marker, they're going to be bigger streaks. Oops, I accidentally went out. That's okay. All right, they can kind of overlap. I'm going to add some red in here too. So these colors are analogous as well. They're also monochromatic, meaning that like if I have red and I add white to it, I'm going to get pink. If I have red and I add black to it, I'm going to get kind of a darker color. Okay, and with this one, once we've added the marker, we're going to go over it with the water, and it's going to turn into watercolor paint. Anytime you use a water-based marker and you get it wet, it's going to bleed like this and turn into paint almost. Okay, so I'm going to keep going. I'm going to fill in all of them, and then when I am done, I will demonstrate how to add the lines.